And now for the final conversation of this hour. This is hour two. We got another left. I'm pleased to be joined by Susie Armstrong, Senior Vice President, Engineering of Qualcomm. Qualcomm is one of the sponsors of today's program, but I had her here anyway because she's just done extraordinary engineering feats, which we're going to get into in a moment. She's also joined by Representative Scott Peters from San Diego, California. He's a member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. He's been a longtime advocate of investing in innovation. Scott, it's great to see you again there. In D.C. I don't know if you're in San Diego, and actually I think you're in Washington now, but it's great to have this discussion. What I wanted to do today is to sort of talk about something that's come up a number of times today, is trust, because we're talking a lot about a new world that everyone's been shoved into as a result of this pandemic. You know, online everything, you know, teaching, healthcare, and yet we haven't talked as much about how do you get the equities of trust right. Susie, you've been at this, and I want to kind of tell my audience, I've spent some extraordinary time with you in the past where you developed the algorithm in 1997 for cell phones to surf the web. You created, packet technology that allowed all of this to transfer. It's come up several times today, but I, just want to say thank you. As we're all obsessed with it, you're the person responsible. And Scott, it's great to be with you. But let me just ask you, how do you think we ought to begin framing what trust guardrails we need? Because this is about people and what they want. And I think that gets forgotten in a lot of these conversations. So Susie, you first.
So, if you look at the cellular technology and you look at what's happened in COVID, I think it's brought the trust issue to the very forefront. Technology and cellular technology has provided us tremendous benefits, working at home and schooling at home. There's downsides as well. But I think the trust and the security issues are paramount. And I think if I can relate it right now, for example, we have been working, we have a lot of expertise in Bluetooth, and we've been working with MIT and Google and Apple on COVID contact tracing algorithms. And there's a lot of, rightfully so, there's a lot of concern about the privacy of that healthcare data in contact tracing. But what I see is in order to be able to take the most advantage of any technology, whether it's Bluetooth for COVID tracing or it's 5G, you've got to have the technologists and you've got to have the policy people and you've got to have the public work very closely together, because otherwise you lose out on the security. You lose out on the benefits of this technology if you just say, it may violate privacy, we have to stop. You have to take some forward-leaning positions and actually work it out. And I think that applies very, very much to the deployment of 5G as well. 5G as a pipe or a road has very strong security features. But if you're going to use it in healthcare, and we hope we do, and fighting fires, et cetera, virtual augmented reality, you have to be able to, secure in each one of those use case industries. You've got to be able to ensure the security and the privacy to actually bring it to fruition.
Thank you. Let me ask Representative Peters, this question about contact tracing and technology and data and privacy. I interviewed recently the foreign minister of Singapore, and Singapore is deploying contact tracing technology in wearables. And he tells me they're anonymizing it, but it creates this ability by looking at GPS to notify people if they have been exposed to the coronavirus and if they need testing. And so it sounds like a good story. Do you buy that? Are there caution points for you in that story?
Well, first of all, Steve, thanks for having me. It's nice to see you again. And I 100% buy it. I'm working with Susie on this same idea from the policy side. And imagine we would even think about using the technology we had in the 1980s to do contact tracing without imagining what we could do with Bluetooth technology that can identify for you who you're next to, who you're 6 feet away from. If you happen to go to a bar, say you went to a bar on the way home without telling your wife to see your buddies. You sat around with Jim and Bob, but you didn't know who the two people who Jim and Bob bought were, or the other people in the bar. But your Bluetooth would be able to know, and if you could identify that you had a positive test, that information could automatically be disseminated to them if they've downloaded the app, if they've opted in, without fail, immediately and accurately, and you wouldn't have to also tell a contact tracer who maybe is a year out of college about your personal habits. I mean, this is something that is even more trustworthy in many ways than the old way, and the idea that we wouldn't take advantage of it and look, confront these legitimate privacy and trust issues head on as a policy matter. But let's not let the tail wag the dog. We have amazing opportunities here. We've already seen in terms of work from home. We've already seen it in terms of telemedicine, which people said would never be taken up. We're never going back in a lot of these ways. And clearly we have some privacy issues, some trust issues to deal with, but let's embrace what we've learned, and let's figure out how to make it work, not back away from it because of some imagined things that we haven't even tried to deal with.
Well, look, I'm going to try to be the devil's advocate here on this for a moment and raise another point. And I'm going to say for the audience, I don't say buy this. I actually think that technology and contact tracing makes a lot of sense in this era. But there are a lot of people that say, hey, look, the Office of Management and Budget got hacked a while back. Twitter just got hacked. And so this is the U.S. government, and this is one of the best companies in America that you ought to think would have all sorts of protections in place. And so people become oriented around that one exception on safety, the one penetration, the one mistake. And it does come to mind. I've interviewed the CEO of Citizen, which is an advocate of an app-based contact tracing moment, very much along some of the lines you just said. But you can imagine that if someone's private life was disclosed or other elements came out, that it basically tilts the trust equation very much against that progress. So I don't want to make you responsible for fixing all of those problems, but I'm just wondering how our frame ought to be organized in such a way that we anticipate that and we deal with it head on, so that we both establish, because I think that's part of the trust process, right?
Yeah, and to bring it over to 5G, I think part of the policy is a core part of the trust process. If you look at 5G, and again, 5G provides a lot of very interesting security features, and you can think basically of the pipe itself as being pretty darn secure. But the pipe, when the data gets out of the pipe and is stored on a computer or stored in the sink or wherever you store data that comes out of a pipe, there's a lot of work that needs to be done between the technology people and the policy people, and it's different for every use case. The kind of security that you want to deploy in telemedicine, for example, or robotic surgery is probably different than the kind of security that you're going to deploy in a less life-threatening type of environment, monitoring, using sensors to monitor, 5G connected sensors to monitor, water uptake in trees, which is one of my favorite applications of 5G. So I guess, the technology people can put all the features in that they want for security, but unless it's a conversation amongst the healthcare people and amongst the policy people and amongst the technologists together, you don't come up with an integrated solution. And that's what I think. That's why I'm very excited about the kinds of discussions that are being had in, for example, in the standards organizations around this. You've got people attending not only from the core technology companies like Qualcomm, but you've got people attending from automotive. You've got people attending from healthcare as well.
Right. I mean, it would be a mistake if you didn't take these head on. And I understand, for instance, in that contact tracing example, that the technologists have talked to the ACLU about privacy, and that's good. But I also say we're fortunate to live in a country where we have laws that value privacy and protect privacy. And I think we should also be aware that some of the competitor nations don't have those same values. And I think one of the things we ought to be thinking about is how to make sure that our American companies can compete on a level playing field, so that technologists that are responsive to these privacy concerns are the ones providing us our hardware and our software.
Congressman, can I ask you something? You know, I'm going to divulge that when we were all allowed to still do cocktail parties and meet, you know, in San Diego, you run in a cool crowd. I mean, some of the smartest biotech, biopharmaceutical, you know, health technology, communications technology people in the nation, in the world, are in your area. And I've always been intrigued by these, you know, incredibly innovative people that are building, you know, bridges to a very different future. And then how DC, where we're sitting right now, is such, you know, a ball and chain around that process and such lagging. But I guess, you know, my question to you is when you kind of look at the regulatory world that we're in Washington, and you look at what your constituents, many of them, are creating, what do we need to solve in that? Because that's also part of the question of human connectivity and getting innovation married with governance in a bright, enlightened way. I know that's a big meta question, but I think it really matters.
Well, it's true that I live in an amazing hub of innovation. Unfortunately, the weather's not very good here. But I would say I think there's a real cultural issue with respect to both places. So, in my community, people sit around the table and they think about solving tomorrow's problems, and they welcome the opportunity to look into tomorrow, and they accept the uncertainty and they run with it. I would say DC, unfortunately, sometimes is a backwards-looking culture. It's fear of taking a step forward, fear of getting yelled at, and holding grudges about what happened, years ago. And I think that to the extent we can take some of the excitement that we have about the ability to solve problems, we can educate ourselves as policymakers about how to accommodate that where it's possible and where it's productive, and how to put guardrails on it, as you said, to make sure that we're protecting our constituents. I mean, I think we have a great opportunity here, and I hope that we will think a little bit more culturally about these changes as opportunities rather than as things that are too expensive or we don't understand. There's great potential out there, and DC needs to get out of the way a little bit, but really cooperate in a way that makes this work for everybody.
Susie, let me just give you the final word. And I just talked to Gary Brantley, who's the Chief Information Officer of Atlanta, and I'll ask you the same question. Does this 5G world that we're moving towards give us any real, genuine opportunity to solve some of the inclusion mistakes and deficits we've had in the past? You know, can we, when you think about trust in part, it's not just trust for the people in the camp. It's a question of how do you get trust among those people who haven't done well or haven't been connected. And I'm just interested in whether you see our social contract can be broader, bigger, better, moving into something that's going to be comprehensive, or whether that's a pipe dream on my part.
I don't think it's a pipe dream at all. And to Mr. Brantley's point, one of the things we're really excited about that COVID actually brought to the forefront of everybody's conversation is the kind of connectivity that we've been able to pull off in areas that have connectivity for education. And for example, San Diego Unified School District, which I think Congressman Peters knows is one of the largest in the country, they actually went partially with local companies, including Qualcomm's help. They went from in-person to online teaching for all of those students, 127,000, I think, in 3 weeks. And I think that was a combination of using technology and using their contacts in the San Diego area. And I guess my point here about the social contract and where we go with this technology just to be practical, there's a lot of discussion about, rightfully so, about the 30 million Americans who do not have access to high-speed internet. And a lot of the focus, rightfully so, goes to rural areas. But there's also a huge number of economically underrepresented people who don't have access to that. And I like to call that not the digital divide, but it's a connectivity divide. And cellular, starting with 4G and moving to 5G and millimeter wave, I think is a really key piece of the economy and education and workforce going forward. For example, you know, you don't necessarily need 5G to do your homework online, but you do need cellular. And so when people talk about expanding broadband and such, I think what the pandemic actually showed to us is it's not just Wi-Fi. You can't go down to the coffee house anymore to do your homework. You can't go to the library to do your homework. These are all places where people gather. So I think it's cellular. And then if you look at 5G, and there's a lot of discussion on sub-6 spectrum versus millimeter wave spectrum, and it's all of the above to get a truly connected nation. But if you look at rural factories, for example, if you look at augmented reality for firefighters to be able to safely, enter a building and know what's going on inside, those applications require 5G, and they require millimeter wave. They require the high bandwidth. They require the fast response time. And it is those kinds of technologies that we really need to be pushing towards if we're going to be able to, take advantage for both education, for healthcare, and for all these use cases that we see.
Well, Representative Scott Peters, I want to say thank you. And isn't it cool to be on with Susie Armstrong? I mean, we owe her for so much more than sending pics on Instagram and surfing the web. There's a lot more there, but those are two highlights that many of our viewers will understand. But I want to thank you, Susie. Thank you so much for joining us, Representative Peters. Really, I thank you for your time and your insights into this. And I do think that we've got to keep these trust questions and how to get it right there. Thank you for your insights on contact tracing and what we can do with Bluetooth and wearables too. So thank you both.
Yeah. It's an honor to be invited. Thank you.